arrive in Geneva. We expect that to happen sometime, maybe in the next 20 to 40 minutes, for the biggest meeting yet of his presidency. You will watch it live here when he lands, less than 24 hours before he's set to confront his Russian counterpart. Plus, what sources are telling us about what it's like inside the president's Putin prep and what he can learn from his predecessor's mistakes. Then back here in Washington, top House Democrats huddling this morning, hashing out their correspondent Andrea Mitchell, both live in Switzerland, along with Evelyn Farkas, who served as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia under President Obama. So, ladies, let's get it going here. Monica, set the stage for us. I know you have some new reporting from sources about the president's prep ahead of his arrival in Geneva, which we expect to see happen really sometime live this hour.
We know, Hallie, for instance, that the president has been preparing for weeks and likely right now on Air Force One as he heads here to Geneva. He's still continuing to study. We know that he is taking this very seriously, in the words of one person familiar with his preparations. This is a president who's not going to be winging it when he meets with Putin here tomorrow for several hours. We do know before he left the White House for Europe that he huddled with about 10 outside experts, people who are intimately familiar with how Putin operates, and those, some of whom actually worked for former President Obama and were Russian ambassadors. People like Michael McFaul, who we know, for instance, who really has been in the room and knows what it's like to come face to face with Putin. So we know that President Biden wanted to talk to these advisors, get some advice, and it's not just from them that he's seeking input. We also know that throughout his travels at the G7, at the NATO and EU summits, he's actually been surveying the world leaders that he's been meeting with, asking them for their thoughts on his meeting with Putin. And yesterday he even said that of all those he has spoken with, all of these foreign heads of state, that they've thanked him for holding these talks tomorrow. And as for what we can expect, we know they're going to last several hours, but we don't have a good idea yet of the exact format, with President Biden saying he is going to confront the Russian president on a number of issues ranging from cybersecurity to Ukraine aggression. But he's also going to be looking for potential areas of cooperation, and he's going to make clear what he said his red lines are, and that he's not looking for conflict with Russia, but that if President Putin continues some of his malign behavior and activity, President Biden said he's not going to hesitate to let him know that the U.S. will respond in kind. Hallie?
Monica Alba, thank you for that. Andrea, let me bring you in here because, listen, when you look at the way that the White House is talking about expectations publicly, I think it is a fair thing to say that they are really downplaying them, right? What are your sources telling you about the private expectations? And what else have you learned as you've been on assignment there overseas?
Well, the fact is they're downplaying expectations, lowballing, if you will, as they would do going into any such meeting, especially one of this importance. But the truth is, that's really what their expectations are. They really think that Putin may well be coming in to just play his, persona of being tough, of whataboutism with the United States, of just his talking points, bringing up January 6th, George Floyd and Black Lives Matter and all of the areas where he believes there are human rights abuses in the United States, trying to make that somehow equivalent with the arrest and attempted assassination of Alexei Navalny, who is, potentially in fear of his life right now in a slave labor camp. So Putin will come in with all of that. They've seen that, and of course they know the predicate of what Donald Trump did, which was to agree with Donald Trump, with Vladimir Putin's denials of election interference and cyber hacking and the like. And they have to figure out how not to get bogged down in that, how to get to their agenda. I do think that there is a chance. I think it's very interesting that Rose Gutmeiler, an experienced arms control negotiator who's been involved in State Department arms control work going back decades for many administrations, that her involvement in that prep tells you a lot, that there may be something that they can build on arms control. They did do the New START agreement, and the fact is they could come out of that with something positive on arms control. There are some indications also that this could be an extended meeting. It could go well beyond. There are some hints that it could even stay over, that because of other logistics, that there could be another night in Geneva for some of the players involved.
Wow. So that would potentially be significant,
I was
Andrea.
told that and of course, it all depends on what happens, so I'm not predicting anything. I'm just saying they're preparing for almost anything, and they're saying that they may be adding some things to the president's agenda in meetings that are taking place today.
Evelyn, let me bring you into the conversation here. Monica and Andrea, stand by for a second. But Evelyn, to Andrea's point that she's making, right? You've got people familiar with the planning who have told NBC News that the best case scenario for the president is an error-free summit and headlines, back here at home on cable news saying he delivered a tough message, which would be in contrast to the decidedly less than tough message in the eyes of many from former President Trump in his interactions with Putin. Evelyn, is that really it? Error-free? That's the bar here?
Okay, well, that is like the public, how the public should perceive it. Here's the thing, Hallie, we have to remember the reason this meeting is taking place is because the invitation was extended to Vladimir Putin when he had amassed his forces on the Ukrainian border. He was blockading the Black Sea, basically threatening another invasion of Ukraine. And he wasn't allowing Alexei Navalny, who was on death's door in prison, to go to the hospital, okay? So when they had the phone call or the discussion, President Biden extended this invitation. So in and of itself, we've already achieved something because Alexei Navalny is alive and there wasn't another massive invasion of Ukraine. I think the most important thing that can come out of this is that President Biden delivers a message that's very clear about the consequences for this ongoing, accelerating, escalatory, reckless Russian foreign policy, which includes all the things that you guys have reported on, right? All the way to these, ransomware, harboring these ransomware cyber criminals, holding, 2 Americans hostage, maybe 3. There's some question about the 3rd. Never mind. They're holding Americans without any just cause. And so, and the list goes on, right?
Right.
So the reality is that if President Biden can make it clear to President Putin that there will be consequences for ongoing behavior, then we can reestablish deterrence. That is the best case. That is what they should be aiming to achieve. Nothing. I would love it if they let the Americans go, but I just don't think that's going to happen. And on arms control, sure, the Russians will say they'll talk with us. We should talk to them. Again, it's part of telling them why their military doctrine is dangerous, why their nuclear doctrine and their nuclear arms situation is dangerous.
Right.
But the reality is, I don't think those things are going to really happen.
So we're going to talk more about kind of Putin-Biden then versus Putin-Biden now coming up later in the show. But when you look, Evelyn, at the way that past presidents have dealt with Putin, they've all taken really some different strategies. And I thought the Washington Post laid it out nicely this morning, talking about how Bill Clinton's relationship with Putin, for example, was short and flat. George W. Bush saw him maybe as an ally on the war on terror, but misjudged his quote-unquote soul. You had Barack Obama, who opened with high hopes for this reset, but then ended up with those sanctions when Putin seized Crimea in 2014. And then, of course, Donald Trump really looking to, you could say, curry Putin's favor with this sort of tit-for-tat sanctions policy by his administration and Congress that didn't have much effect. Andrea, what is your sense of what President Biden can learn from his predecessors? And Evelyn, I'll ask the same question to you before we go here.
Well, certainly not to cave in, not to really do what Donald Trump did and accept Putin's explanations of everything, to be tough. That is the bottom line. And we can see that going in. You saw that in the president's news conference yesterday. You could read exactly what he's planning to say, what he's planning to do. Not have a joint news conference. All of the advisors telling him not to do that because Putin plays to the camera. The day before, when he was still at the G7, he said, I'm not going to be competing. The reason I'm not having a joint news conference is because I don't want to compete for that kind of, television audience. I want to tell you exactly what happened and not become, part of this competition to be a showman. So not to have a joint news conference where Putin would definitely upstage him,
right,
because the Russians have done that at every turn. And I think to show more willingness to deal, perhaps, than President Obama did. Perhaps Obama did not look for enough windows that could have been opened with Vladimir Putin.
Evelyn, quick final thoughts to you.
Well, I would actually say that President Obama did try hard, and that's part of the problem. I think that President Biden has learned from President Obama and all the other predecessors that you have to be firm and you have to be ready to ratchet up. For example, sanctions. Russian sanctions are here. Iranian, North Korean sanctions are way up here. There's a lot of space in there. So I think President Biden has to be firm. That's the only way to go with this Kremlin. And then maybe you can find common ground on little tactical, transactional things. But those are very limited right now with this Kremlin.
Evelyn Farkas, Andrea Mitchell, Monica Alba, Air Force One, on its way to you, where you are in Geneva as we speak. Thank you so much for your reporting. We're going to be watching that landing live as President Biden arrives in Switzerland for that highly anticipated face-to-face. We're going to have a lot more coming up here on this show on that as well, including that moment in which President Biden criticized former President Trump and the Republican Party while overseas. Why that is creating some GOP consternation. Plus, new reporting just out this morning that former President Trump pressured the Justice Department to back his false election claims. We'll have the details. Also breaking this hour, House any minute, we may get new reporting from our sources inside the room on a decisive meeting between House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and her committee chairs on investigating January 6th, with NBC News confirming this morning they are talking through their next move. The options on the table: trying to modify that bipartisan commission bill that failed in the Senate, or form a select committee, or let committees conduct investigations themselves, or maybe appoint one committee chair to take the lead. That meeting coming just hours ahead of a couple of key hearings on the insurrection, with witnesses including FBI Director Chris Wray and Capitol Police Inspector General Michael Bolton. But you know who's not going to be in the room? The acting Capitol Police Chief, who declined an invitation from the Oversight Committee, the U.S. Capitol Police, calling the invite a last-minute ad that conflicted with the other hearing involving Bolton, and saying that she's agreed to testify at some point in the future. With me now to talk about this and some other news breaking on the Oversight Committee this morning is Democratic Congresswoman Robin Kelly of Illinois, a member, of course, of that committee. Congresswoman, good morning, and thanks for being on the show.
Good morning to you. Good morning to you.
Of course. Let me pick up on what we just talked about regarding the acting Capitol Police Chief, Chief Pittman. Committee ranking member James Comer, as you probably know, is accusing her of trying to, quote, avoid answering the hard questions. He's criticizing Democrats, your party, for not doing more to bring her in front of that committee today. What's your position on that?
Well, I'm going to take her for her word. She said that she could not come today, but from my understanding, she's been cooperative, and she did say that she would come at another time. So I'm going to believe her.
Okay. And we'll see when we hear from her again. Let me also get your expectations from that meeting between Speaker Pelosi and the committee chairs that we know is happening today on what the next steps are for this January 6th investigation. How soon might you expect a decision on the direction here? Are we talking hours, days, weeks? What would be your preference as to what direction this goes?
Well, hopefully before we leave on Thursday, we'll have our marching orders and we'll know which direction we're going to go.
And do you have a preference as to how you handle the riot investigation? Would you like to see a select committee? Would you prefer to see one committee chair, for example?
I wish that the Senate would have passed what was sent over there. That was, bipartisan, independent, and they didn't do that. So whatever we can do as close to that as possible, so whatever comes out of it will be believed and not criticized. That's what I would like to see.
Let me ask you about another big headline this morning coming out of your committee, and I want to set this up for our viewers here. It's new documents from the Oversight Committee released showing just how former President Trump tried to pressure his DOJ leadership to investigate the election results, even obviously with no evidence of fraud. In one instance, according to these documents, having his assistant, for example, email then Deputy AG Rosen even before Bill Barr had stepped down. All of this happening at this really critical week for the Justice Department. This was right around, middle of December when states were certifying the election results, showing that Donald Trump rightfully lost. I want to talk to you about this because the committee is now requesting interviews from people involved, former officials, including former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows at the White House. So let me start here. How far is your committee willing to take those requests for interviews? Are you prepared for subpoenas if need be?
Yes, we are. We need to investigate this fully. This is another threat to our democracy. This is horrible that the president used these people in this manner. And also, I know he was the boss, but they should have spoken up. That, we should not have had to find out about this in this manner. It's absolutely horrible that this happened.
So you blame then just as much perhaps as the former president, some of the officials whom he was pressuring? Am I understanding that right?
Yes. I mean, I have a staff, and hopefully if I ask my staff to do something that they know is not the right thing to do, that they will speak up to me, or they'll go above my head. I know there's no above the president's head, but they'll go to someone for help, not just go along with the program of something that they know is not right.
Were you surprised when you saw some of the documents that your committee obtained in this process?
Yes. I mean, I know President Trump has done some unbelievable things, but, you know, it's still, we're still finding out things that he's done that is just amazing. And I'll still use the word unbelievable. I've used it a lot in his 4 years, and I'm still using it.
The New York Times reports that Mr. Rosen is currently in the process of negotiating for a single interview with your committee, with some of the Senate committees that are looking into this, others that are looking into, you know, the final days of the Trump administration, if you will. Do you have perhaps a status update on how those negotiations are going? When might you expect to hear from him? As these emails show, he was obviously somebody who was, you know, a key part of these discussions.
I'm sorry to say I don't have a status update on where we are with that.
I assume he's somebody you want to hear from?
Yes, I want to hear from anyone that has been involved, that has been touched by this.
Before I let you go, at what point do these requests for interviews, as the Oversight Committee puts it, turn into legal action, subpoenas, sort of forcing the hand?
I think if we meet upon continuous resistance, then we'll have to take it a step further.
Like in a month, in 2 months, 6 months?
Well, it depends how, with these committees, you never know, how long things are going to take, how long the hearings are. But I think that, we give people a chance to come forward, to be witnesses, to come to the hearings. And then if there's a lot of resistance, then we have to take it to another level. And I think sooner than later, because we need to deal with this. And then there's so many other things that we have to deal with also.
Congresswoman Robin Kelly making a lot of news for us this morning. Congresswoman Kelly, thank you so much. Appreciate your time. And that news, of course, that if these interview requests are not accommodated, subpoenas may be on the way. Thank you. Coming up here on the show this morning, the White House.
The table now is going a much different leader than the one he sat across the table from in 2011. If you just think of some of the events that have transpired over that past decade, you had the annexing of Crimea, you had the U.S. election interference in 2016 and 2020. There are numerous companies and U.S. government agencies that have been hacked into by Russian actors. And then, of course, there's this increased aggression at home by Putin against his own political dissidents. So when I talk to foreign policy experts, people who know Putin, who have worked with this administration and the Obama administration, they say that Putin has only grown more autocratic, only more hostile to the West, and now clearly sees him at war with the West. So that's why when you hear President Biden talking about what he hopes to get out of this meeting, we're not hearing any talk about a grand reset like we heard under the Obama administration. It is this stable and predictable relationship. It is trying to put a floor under the spiraling down of relations. And that's what we see the president coming to the table with because of the leader he now faces in Putin.
Richard, talk about this quote unquote stable and predictable relationship that President Biden has repeatedly said he's looking for with Vladimir Putin. You've covered, Russia and Putin for years now. That's not really what Putin's looking for. Is that fair to say?
I don't think Putin is looking for just stable, normal relations with the United States. Putin sees a historic grievance that he wants to correct. He's still looking back to the collapse of the Soviet Union. He thinks that that was an injustice, that the United States treated Russia unfairly, pushed the Soviet Union aside, and never allowed it to rebuild. And he has been trying to rebuild that, not necessarily Soviet empire, but Russian empire ever since. And that's why we've seen him take pieces of Crimea, threaten neighbors. And he wants more respect from the United States, and he wants recognition that Russia is once again a superpower. And they are meeting here in Geneva, and they will be meeting shortly. This is neutral territory, and this comes at the end of this first foreign trip by President Biden. For President Biden, it's very different, and it's significant that it's coming at the end. First, President Biden wanted to meet with democracies, wanted to show solidarity among powerful democracies around the world. Then he wanted to meet with NATO countries, the world's biggest military alliance, set up to confront the Soviet Union. And then at the tail end of the trip, almost as an afterthought, is the message that they're trying to project. He's going to meet with Vladimir Putin. That's why they're not holding a joint press conference. They want to show that this is just something that the president has to do on his way home back to the United States after he's conferred with the democracies, after he's met with the NATO alliance, that he's going to meet with Putin, but that Putin won't be the center of his agenda like it was so much the center of the Trump administration's agenda. For 4 years, we spent so much time investigating, talking about Russia and the United States, and I think that President Biden wants to move on from that, but Vladimir Putin does not. Vladimir Putin likes to be talked about, likes Russia to be at the center of the world's attention, and wants it to be seen, if not as an equal, something close to an equal with the United States.
Hey, Shannon, real quick, give us a sense of who these greeters are on the tarmac as Air Force One is landing in Geneva, and what the president's schedule looks like over the next 24 hours.
Right. Well, a number of Swiss officials there meeting him now, and he'll have more meetings with Swiss officials here. You know, I will tell you, though, Hallie, we don't really have much insight into how things are going to go tomorrow. The White House is indicating there's going to be a lot of game time decisions made. We don't have a definitive start time for this meeting. We don't know how long it's going to last. It has been indicated it will be a lengthy meeting. And then we do know that whatever happens, the president does, though, plan to leave at the end of the day on Wednesday and head back to Washington.
Michael Carpenter, I want to bring you in here, former foreign policy advisor to then Vice President Biden, managing director of the Penn Biden Center for Diplomacy and Global Engagement. You have known the now president for many years. You know him. You know Russia. We've talked about how folks familiar with the planning talk about, hey, best case scenario might be an error-free summit for President Biden. Shannon and Richard have talked about the setting of a floor in this relationship with Vladimir Putin. What do you think the expectations should be, or any deliverables should be, for the president coming out of this thing as we wait to see him emerge from the cabin of Air Force One any second?
Yeah, well, Haley, I think this is not a meeting that is geared towards deliverables. This is a meeting that comes after, as Richard just laid out, 3 very important meetings with our closest democratic allies at the G7, with NATO, with our EU friends. And so President Biden is able to approach this meeting with President Putin from a position of strength and allied unity. And that's very important, because the primary purpose here is for the president to convey to President Putin in no uncertain terms how the United States will defend our interests going forward. You know, I think Shannon was correct when she noted that to a certain extent, the U.S. and Russia are engaged in a war, or Russia and the West, frankly, are engaged in a war. It's not a kinetic, overt war. It's often covert, but there is constant jockeying back and forth. And so what I think this meeting is really all about is, on the one hand, setting in place a dialogue for strategic stability. You've heard that word discussed many times. This is at the strike level concerning weapons of mass destruction and ensuring there is a modicum of stability or equilibrium at that level. But also, very importantly, it's discussing what happens at the sub-strategic level, where you have Russia engaged in various what we call active measures operations, such as cyber attacks, disinformation, dark money, the alleged bounties in Afghanistan, and other forms of covert operations that could easily get out of control and escalate. And so it's going to be important for the president to be able to both set in place a strategic dialogue with military experts, but then also to convey how the U.S. will defend our interests at the sub-strategic level.
There are at least 2 families here in the United States, of course, who are hoping that there might be more of a deliverable coming out of this discussion. And those are the families, of course, of Trevor Reed and Paul Whelan, 2 U.S. citizens imprisoned in Russia, the U.S. describing them as basically sham evidence, convicted on these sham trials, preposterous evidence. Richard, there is new audio now that NBC News has obtained of Paul Whelan, recorded, I believe, from a labor camp, in which he talks about basically pleading with President Biden to try to bring this to a speedy resolution here. As we wait for President Biden to walk off the plane, and I know this is an issue you've covered extensively in the past, what do you think the prospects are for those families who this week have told us here at NBC News that they don't care how their loved ones get out of Russia, they just want them out, whether that means a prisoner swap, which Vladimir Putin says he's open to, or anything else?
So these are things that are going to be on the table and are going to be negotiated. Russia believes that these are cards that it can play. It is accused them of espionage effectively, and says that they were convicted, that they found evidence on a flash drive. The Russian intelligence agencies found evidence on a flash drive suggesting that they were engaged in some sort of nefarious activities. But if Russia wants to release them, perhaps it could relieve some pressure on Russia to release Alexei Navalny, the main opposition leader who was put into a forced labor camp after having been poisoned. So whether they will get down to that level is hard to know. These talks are scheduled, or they're not really scheduled, but they're expected to last several hours. And those are the kind of cards that you could put on the table if there is a deadlock, if the two aren't seeing eye to eye on macro issues, Russia's position in the world, Crimea, will it attack Crimea? Perhaps they could make some progress on, from the state's perspective, minor issues, but from the family's perspective, immensely important issues to get their loved ones out of Russia, accused, they say, of false charges. Here in Geneva, I could say security is very tight. There have been maritime patrols on Lake Geneva. Just a few moments ago, we were hearing helicopters above. There are lots of police, lots of foot soldiers, uniformed officers, some of them carrying weapons. So it is certainly not a tense environment, but this is a city that has hosted many diplomatic events in the past. Right. It has been neutral territory for a long time. Once again, it is being used as neutral territory, but security is tight. And obviously, yes, for those families, that would be an immense deliverable to see their loved ones delivered home.
We are watching, of course, Air Force One. No movement yet from President Biden as he gets off the plane. We should note, though, that it is possible, as always, that he could walk over to members of the press pool traveling with him who are stationed. You can't see it in this shot, but under the wider shot, under the wing. Perhaps, maybe he would take some comments or take some questions or make comments. Probably unlikely, but that's what we're watching and waiting for here. As you can see, the president's vehicle there stationed in front of Air Force One. Michael, we've been talking in this conversation with Richard and Shannon about the risks for President Biden here. What about the risks for President Putin back home in Moscow with this meeting?
Well, I actually disagree with the notion that, as some pundits have said, that this is a high-stakes summit. I think, as I said earlier, this is an opportunity for the United States to convey how it will defend its interests, and for Putin to explain what he sees as threatening or potentially destabilizing behavior. So it'll be important for them to do this tete-a-tete, face-to-face, because, you know, certain things can be conveyed over the phone, but really nothing substitutes for this sort of face-to-face meeting, especially for a tactile politician like President Biden, to be able to look President Putin in the eye and tell him how certain destabilizing actions that Russia is undertaking today could impact their security going forward, and how we will take actions to ensure that our interests are defended. That message is very, very important, as well as consequences and costs that are imposed for Russian hostile actions. President Putin has to hear this directly from the president in order for it to sink in. And I think this is an opportunity to do that. I don't see any real downside risk here. A lot of people have said that President Putin will spin this meeting at home as if he's the equal of the U.S. president. Well, President Putin, frankly, spins everything at home. He says that his COVID response is fantastic, that the economy is doing well, that he's fighting corruption. That's clearly nonsense. So he will spin this, yes, but I don't think that's necessarily a victory for President Putin.
Shannon, as we are watching here, President Biden just landing in Geneva on Air Force One as he is overseas, there is still an intersection of domestic politics, right? That came to the forefront over the last 24 hours when the president was talking about, for example, former President Trump, the Republican Party. House GOP leader Kevin McCarthy took some real exception to that this morning. He was out on, I think it was Fox News, basically slamming the fact that President Biden brought up domestic policies while overseas, pointing out that there was a lot of criticism from former President Trump for doing the same thing at the time. How is the White House thinking about and handling this intersectionality between the foreign and the domestic that any president has to deal with when they are traveling overseas?
Well, I was told before this trip that President Biden planned to continue to be engaged with the domestic policy happening back home on this infrastructure package. This has been such a whirlwind trip. It is kind of hard to imagine how much time he would have had to engage in that. But we do know from White House officials that they are continuing to have meetings with Democrats on the Hill. Top advisor Steve Ricchetti is speaking with Democrats later today. So they continue to be involved on the home front. But, I mean, Hallie, this is really the core of President Biden's domestic agenda. This infrastructure plan and his hopes to have had a follow-on families and education spending plan to come after this. He has such a limited window to get anything done domestically in Washington time terms that he really needs this to happen this summer. And this summer being before August when Congress recesses, or maybe shortly after, if he wants to achieve those domestic goals. There's a wide expectation that Democrats will lose the House, and there, of course, will go any chance of them getting through legislation. So, of course, while there is all this focus on this Putin summit, domestically is where the president's agenda really hangs in the balance. And I will say, even on the foreign policy front, we've heard so much talk about Russia, obviously, because of this high-profile, significant meeting going on here with Putin. But even on the foreign policy front, the president has tried to get more attention on China and has been pushing G7 leaders, NATO leaders, to ratchet up the pressure on China, because that he as well sees as one of the biggest threats globally. So, as much as we're talking about Russia, there's certainly a lot of other issues on the president's mind.
Richard, what is your sense of how Vladimir Putin might try to, as we see President Biden now stepping off Air Force One, let's take a look, taking off his sunglasses, walking down the stairs. He's being greeted by a number of Swiss officials before he heads to where he'll be overnighting ahead of that meeting with Vladimir Putin that we've been talking about here tomorrow. The press pool traveling with the president is too far away to really hear anything over the motor of Air Force One, over the sound of the engine there. But we are seeing President Biden greeting some of these officials. Richard, as we watch this scene unfold and as we look to see if President Biden might take a question or two, how might Vladimir Putin exploit some of the domestic divide between Democrats and Republicans back here in the U.S.? Russian state TV, according to the Daily Beast, just interviewed one of the Capitol rioters who raided House Speaker Pelosi's office, portraying him as an innocent victim of government persecution, which may be a signal as to how Putin might try to use U.S. political divisions against the president here.
Oh, that is absolutely how Russia has been doing this, how it has been playing it, and how they will continue to do this. This is an old tactic going back to the days of the Soviet Union. Anytime there is a major problem in the United States, Russia points to it to deflect and deflect and deflect again. When the United States criticized Russia for treatment of political dissidents, Russia criticized the treatment of African Americans during the civil rights movement. When the United States criticizes Russia about Alexei Navalny, it points to the Black Lives Matter movement. So it is always about deflection, and there's an old term called whataboutism, meaning you ask Russia a question about its domestic policy, and it says, well, what about the situation in the United States? Who are you to point fingers of blame? And President Biden's main message on this has been trying to unify the democratic world, unify America's allies to confront China and, to a lesser degree, to confront Russia. And Russia is going to point to January 6th, to many things that happened under the Trump administration, to say the United States foundation to claim that it is the bastion of democracy and the world's defender of democracy isn't as strong as it claims, and that it has some of the same problems or similar problems that Russia does. So I think we're definitely going to hear, well, not hear, they will be, only those in the meeting will hear, but they will be quite a bit of whataboutism.
Yeah. President Biden, accompanied by the Swiss president, aviators on as he walks over to his vehicle, gets inside. It looks like he will not be walking over under wing to speak with members of the press. As you see the president getting into the beast there, getting ready now for, listen, a critical 24 hours, no matter how you slice it. Michael, President Biden has met with dignitaries, leaders before, never like this as president, as he is touching down now in Geneva, Switzerland, as part of his first overseas trip. Knowing him and knowing what we've heard from his wife, that he has over-prepared for this summit, share some insights on what you think might be going through his mind, how he might be approaching this.
Well, I mean, don't forget that President Biden has extensive decades of experience dealing with world leaders, not necessarily as president, but, he has stood face to face with President Milosevic of Serbia during the darkest days of human rights abuses in Serbia and said things very frankly and plainly to his face that few other American politicians would have been able to do in that situation. I mean, back in the U.S. Soviet period, during the Cold War, then Senator Biden traveled to the Soviet Union and met with various dignitaries there to convey U.S. intentions regarding arms control. So he does have deep expertise. And as you say, he, I think, has over-prepared for this meeting, which just simply means he has talked to his staff extensively. He's talked to outside experts. He's gotten a range of opinions of how they think Putin is going to approach this meeting so that he's prepared and so that he can deliver his message most effectively. I mean, that's what this is really all about. As I said, it's not so much about deliverables. I mean, there certainly will be a discussion of Reed and Whelan, the U.S. Prisoners in Russia. There will be a discussion of Alexei Navalny, perhaps even a request that Navalny be released as a prisoner. But fundamentally, this is about conveying U.S. expectations for how Russia will behave and what will happen if Russia continues to engage in hostile actions. A lot of the things that we've seen recently from Russia, including the ransomware attacks, including other kinds of active measures against the U.S., have the potential to spiral out of control, or potentially for a U.S. reaction to those measures to then be misinterpreted by the Russian side. And so it's very important to lay those expectations out and ensure that in the future there is less scope for misunderstanding about how we're going to approach these very contentious issues.
Hey, Shannon, as we have seen now, President Biden depart the airport where he's just landed in Geneva. Can you give us a sense of, I know he has other meetings, right, as you alluded to, scheduled before the summit, right?
Yes, he does. So he was going to be meeting with some Swiss officials this evening. He is expected to have some downtime. And when you talk about preparations, we certainly know that he prepared ahead of this. My colleague Peter Alexander was told that President Biden had a meeting with advisors in the Roosevelt Room before leaving. And some of those advisors included people who had worked in the Obama administration, in the Trump administration, to help prepare him. And as you were discussing, make sure that he has a sense of how Putin is going to react so he can clearly convey that message. But as far as we know from his schedule now, he does have a lot of downtime, which is time he could use to further prepare, to go over some issues, to meet with people who are on the ground and try and get some more insight there as well.
Shannon, I don't mean to interrupt you, but we are getting some new information actually from the plane. Senior officials talking about the expected layout for this meeting tomorrow. I have to tell you guys, for our viewers here, this is significant because we had a lot of questions about timing, about who would be in the room, and about how this would go down. We are now getting some answers. I'm going to lay out what we think is expected with the cautionary note that things could likely change. However, per senior White House officials, Vladimir Putin is set to arrive in Geneva at 1 o'clock local time. Remember, with the time difference, that's about 7 o'clock Eastern time back here in Washington. You're obviously going to see all of this unfolding live right here on MSNBC. President Biden will arrive after that. For the first part of the meeting, you're going to have each of the principals plus an additional person. So we know that President Biden is expected to bring Secretary of State Tony Blinken. President Putin will bring his foreign minister. Each side will have a translator, and we do expect to see some of that meeting. So that's part one that happens tomorrow morning. After this, there will be more people coming into the room. We don't have a full list of who we expect on either side there, but probably 4 additional key members of President Biden's team and President Putin's team. After the meeting finishes, there will be a press conference from Vladimir Putin, solo, then a press conference from President Biden, solo. And this is all expected to last somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 to 5 hours, again, as we will be on the air for it all. Richard and Shannon, I really want to get your sense of this because, Richard, much was made, I think, of the last Putin summit that we covered together, which was, of course, then President Trump, and the idea that the two of them had time together. Not a lot known about what they said with only the translators in the room. Now we know who else will be inside these discussions between President Biden and President Putin, Richard.
Well, Well, the context is also completely different. If you remember, under President Trump, there was this lingering suspicion that President Trump was somehow beholden to Vladimir Putin, that Vladimir Putin had some compromise on him, that he had the ability to blackmail him. That was the overarching theme. And then President Trump didn't take many actions to dissuade those rumors, aside from denying them. He was constantly giving Putin the benefit of the doubt, taking Putin's word over the word of the intelligence agencies. After that summit, coming out and saying that he spoke with Putin about the election interference with all U.S. intelligence agencies say that Russia engaged in, and he said, Putin said that it never happened, and I believe him. So it was a very, very different context when that meeting looked conspiratorial. It looked like they were talking behind closed doors and didn't want anyone else to know what they were talking about. Now we have a 5-hour series of talks with the secretaries of state there next to them, and then other advisors joining them. So it's a different context. It's a different kind of meeting, and I think we're going to see a different kind of outcome. If you remember, that meeting also ended with a very chummy joint press conference in which President Trump was laughing, was engaging, was talking to Vladimir Putin on the podium,
it was wild,
giving him time. Well, we're certainly not going to see that this time, where I bet you there was negotiation to see who would do the first press conference, because you want the final word here. And the fact that President Biden got the second press conference shows that the U.S. wasn't willing to cave on some of those logistics. But you talked earlier about a Cold War, and I think the Cold War is really an important framework to see this. For the United States, the U.S. moved on from the Cold War. The U.S. defeated the Soviet Union in the Cold War, but Russia never really moved on. For Vladimir Putin, the Cold War is something that he is still dealing with, that he wants to recover from, that Russia was never able to get over the humiliation of the Cold War. The United States now, it appears, wants to move into a more Cold War dynamic with China. But for Russia, it is all about reclaiming past glory, reclaiming past position. And then don't forget one other thing, which is the personal position of Vladimir Putin. Some call him the richest man in the world. He has accused the Democrats, he's accused specifically Hillary Clinton, of trying to overthrow him. He wants to stay in power. So he has Russia's interests at heart, but he also has Vladimir Putin's interests at heart. And he has been recently cracking down on dissidents in a major way. There were new laws passed in Russia, effectively making him president for life. So there was the Putin president of Russia, ascendant Russia, and there is Putin who wants to defend what Putin has.
A newsy 25 minutes or so here on MSNBC Reports this morning, as we now have learned when Vladimir Putin will arrive tomorrow, when you will see the coverage of this summit unfold. For now, expected likely, based on the timing that we're getting from senior White House officials, between around 7 a.m. and maybe noon, although likely later, given that this thing, many experts say, will probably go longer than is slotted for. In the room for that first part of the meeting, President Biden, President Putin, Tony Blinken, Sergei Lavrov, before that discussion expands. I want to thank, if we still have him, Richard